I hope you know how much fun I've had the last 3 weeks. There's no greater joy in a minister's life than to do baptisms and to christen babies. To be with Madison and Wolfshawn and Armand on Easter Sunday as they entered the waters of baptism, and to be with Tate last Sunday, and now this morning with Reese. And I should have mentioned and didn't that the maker of that beautiful garment is not just pregnant, but her name is Mariah Allen, and Mariah works with our junior fellowship and junior worship kids here at church, and we're grateful for that too, Mariah. But weeks like these last 3 make you want to come back and back and back. So thank you. Our gospel lesson today, could be tomorrow, but it's today. Our gospel lesson for today is Luke 24, verses 36 through 49. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Messiah is to suffer and rise from the dead on the 3rd day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sin is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses to these things. And see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." Is there a difference between disbelieving and unbelief? A difference between disbelieving and unbelief. When I looked at a few online dictionaries, being too lazy to dig out my 7th edition of the Webster International College Edition, it appears that there were implied differences between unbelief and disbelief. Unbelief, it seems, is a strictly religious word, of which belief, of course, is the antonym. Disbelief is less religious in nature, and interestingly, the most often used example in these online dictionaries for the word disbelief was most frequently disbelieving in UFOs. I disbelieve in them too. Now, I don't want to sound like I think I'm smarter than these online dictionaries, even if I am. But I want to suggest a bit of a different definition for disbelieving. I want to suggest that disbelieving is the moment, the second, the instant between unbelief and belief. In today's reading from the Gospel of Luke, Luke describes the scene immortalized in the Gospel of John but without singling out Thomas. The disciples are gathered together. Luke doesn't exactly say where. There are no locked doors, no closed windows. And the fear they experience, as Luke describes it, is not the fear of the Jewish leadership. It is the fear of what they are seeing, what they think is an apparition. Much the same as the women who had gone into the tomb and encountered the two men in dazzling white garments in Luke's gospel. The disciples are terrified, but they're terrified of Jesus. So Jesus talks to them. He shows them his hands and his feet. And then Luke says, in their joy, they were disbelieving. In their joy, they were disbelieving. In that moment, in that instant, their unbelief at the women's story, which they perceived, according to Luke, to be an idle tale, in this moment, it was becoming belief. Do you remember the 2009 Kentucky Derby? A certain horse was trailered from New Mexico, not flown in on a special jet, but trailered behind an old car. The horse was a 50-1 long shot, but Mine That Bird rallied along the rail to win and lit up the tote board for more than $100. If you held one of those winning tickets, I feel certain you experienced disbelief. You saw that you had won. You knew it, but your joy was so great that you couldn't believe it. It took your breath away. It left you speechless, but only for a second or two. And then joy, great joy, unbelievable joy. Now, I could use another example, one that turns the table, producing anything but joy for some. But the movement from belief to disbelief to belief was the same, only much worse for Kentucky fans. It was such a painful moment that it is only known as the shot. I know you remember. And I know you remember the unbelief. And then the disbelief. And then the belief. But the joy was elsewhere. I remember, and I know you do too. And for Kentucky fans, nothing has been the same since. No, I won't even go there. I just want you to remember that there are Duke fans in this church too. In the balcony. Sorry, Rob. He's getting tired of me pointing him out. Kind of like Nelson. I want to suggest that the disciples were having one of those life-transforming moments. One of those suspended in time moments when everything slows down and everything becomes crystal clear, when unbelief gives way to joyous disbelief. And in the blink of an eye, disbelief turns into believing. The disciples who walked the Emmaus Road with a stranger had already had their moment of disbelieving joy. They had walked with him, talked with him, sat down to eat with him. One moment they didn't know who the stranger was, and in the next their eyes were opened And they knew. So great their joy. It was such a transforming moment that they turned around and ran back to Jerusalem to share the good news with their friends. Then, before the disciples had time to digest their story, they see something, someone. They don't understand. They can't explain. It is such a shock that their minds race and they assume the worst, that it's a ghost. But the terror passes, as does the confusion. And in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, their unbelief becomes joyous disbelief. And soon, very soon, their profound belief changes the world. As I see it, all of us who travel the road of faith experience such moments on our journey. Oh, they may not be as grand and dramatic as Paul's while on the road to Damascus, or of these disciples that night so long ago, but we've all had such, well, forgive me, such magic moments. Pete and Elle recently had one of those moments, and we celebrated their joy with them this morning. Tate and Armand and Madison and Wolfshan just had one of those moments. And we've had them too. So let's take a moment, just a moment, and remember one of ours. Remember when we finally got it, understood that God loved us, knew that we would make it through the rough patch, have seen the effect of mourning fade away, have found our place of service, or perhaps, as the old hymn says, the hour we first believed. Let's take a moment. If you will allow me to share mine, one that I have shared before. It happened for me while I was in seminary. Dr. Molly Marshall, who was intuitive enough to recognize when a student was suffering not from not getting the latest lecture on the atonement, but from something much deeper. Dr. Marshall handed me a well-worn copy of A Cry of Absence, a little volume by Martin Marty, renowned professor of church history at the University of Chicago. The book is Marty's reflection on the illness and death of his wife of 45 years. I remember it as if it were today, reading those words which transformed my troubled unbelief into joyous, tearful disbelieving. He was describing what he called wintry Christians. He was quoting Catholic theologian Karl Rahner, who was condemned by Pope Pius XII, but whose writings were to become the singular driving force behind the transformation of the Roman Catholic Church in Vatican II. This type, the wintry type, Rahner said, are those who, although they are committed Christians, who pray and receive the sacraments, nevertheless find themselves at home in a wintry sort of spirituality in which they stand alongside the atheist, but without saying the atheist no. In that moment, one which I'm certain was no longer than a single second, but which has lasted from that moment till now, I knew in a way I had never known before, knew with disbelieving joy that I too am a child of God. Amen.